My name is Quill Taylor, and I have taken it upon myself to record my findings pertaining to the life of a young boy named Anthony Todd. This is Quill Taylor recording entry number 4, written on my 5th day in Mulgrove. Entry begins. It's 11 a.m. My day has not yet begun, as I have been holed up in my flat all morning attempting to crack down on some drafts. I got quite a bit done, despite several distractions, the most prominent being lack of focus. I'm not going outside for a walk today. I've already gone out briefly to mail correspondence to some family, and it took quite a bit of stubborn resistance to walk myself back inside. I'm not going to write about this again. While I do want to document what's happening with me, as is the purpose of a journal, I am noting my insistence on continuing this pattern of talking about, patterns. So I will turn to the other thing that has been occupying many of my thoughts, the fantastical adventures of Timothy Todd. This book is not at all what I expected. I'm about halfway through, but I'm rereading some of the first section again, as there are several fun elements of foreshadowing towards the beginning. I don't really know what else to write about today, so I'm going to summarize the book. This also helps me get ideas for things to use in my own writing, so I'll use it as an exercise. The book begins with a bit of history. It is believed that long ago, their world was made of only water, stretching deep down into places where the sun no longer reached. In the darkness, molten rock bubbled and bled out of large cracks on the ocean floor. Eventually, they grew in size and built up, until finally, they became small islands. It took the gods, 3 beings of immortal wisdom and knowledge, many more eons before they created beings to inhabit the planet. These beings were granted a very long and prosperous life, and each island was given a gift in order to aid their prosperity. Some were given large and beautiful gardens of fruits that tasted of the sweetest nectar, and flowers that bloomed even in the harshest of conditions. Others were given tools and materials to make their homes and easier collect what was on the island to use as their own. Some were graced with minerals to make fine tools and trinkets of, and some were graced with knowledge, so that their inhabitants may one day learn how to navigate the vast sea that stretched across their world. One island in particular seemed to be given nothing. Its inhabitants were not given fruits nor flowers, so they appreciated the beauty of the weed washing onto the shore and the bark of the trees covered in thick moss. They were not given tools or materials, so they used the trees and weeds to create shelter from the storms and the hot sun. They were not given minerals, but they were rich with jewelry and trinkets made of wood and shells. And they were not given knowledge, but they did not remain on their island. They built ships, travelling the wide expanse of water that greeted them with both untempered rough storms and clear, sparkling blue hues dancing in the sunlight. Given time and travel, and as they met with the other islands and communed with other living beings, they came to realize that they had been given a gift, the gift of freedom, to choose their own path and to move forward using only the world around them. And so, none were unhappy, and their island was prosperous. The book begins centuries later on the ship of a pirate captain by the name of Meridian Pepper, and it follows the cabin boy Timothy Todd. He's been on the ship for as long as he can remember, and one day he wants to become captain. However, the captain of the ship hasn't and refuses to choose a first mate. And so, Timothy is left to scrub the decks and shine the captain's shoes. The captain, who happens to be the main villain, is from the island that was given fruits and flowers. He wants to travel to the island of the free people and take away their freedom, as he is jealous of it. Timothy had overheard this while working outside the captain's quarters, and decided that he was going to do everything in his power to stop Meridian. A classic tale of heroism. I did not expect, when picking up this book, to enjoy it as much as I am. It's not that anything drew me away, really. Actually, I'm quite certain the book drew me in rather than anything. I'm also very excited to get to the next part. The book is split into 2 parts, and after a bit of forethought, I decided it would probably be best if I read it back. If not to solidify the information in my mind, then to enjoy the slow build-up of Timothy's character and the captain's villainy. Hold on. I think there's someone staring at me on the street. Yes, definitely someone there. She looks like the woman from the manor, same sort of clothing, this time in all black. Standing in the sun, no less. She must be sweltering. I'm going to stop writing in here. She knows I've seen her through my window and is coming across the road. I think I'll go out to meet her, see what she wants. Until next time, I suppose. Entry ends, rather abruptly, I'm afraid. Yes, my first meeting with Abby. The next entry should be quite interesting. While I was the one who wrote it, I am curious about what my immediate thoughts were on the matters she brought up that day, as I have limited memory and so much has happened since. Addressing the matter of the fantastical adventures, as with History of Moorgrove, I no longer have this book in my possession, but I have been thinking about it recently. I can't ignore the name similarities to another young boy I've met. Although it's easily possible as a coincidence, Todd is a quite common last name around here, it seems important to record this entry as each one seems to carry its own weight. But I have yet to figure out if this was worth my time to read in the long run. I suppose I'll find out eventually. On another note, I find it just as, if not more important, to record my more recent findings in my investigation of this town. We visited the caves yesterday, the ones in the woods near the manor. I'll admit I have been curious about them since I stumbled upon them last week, but I am fortunate enough that my gracious host has allowed me to explore them without interference, and with a bit of aid. I took a few notes while exploring, and I'll do some clarification here. It was midday when we went in. I brought a pack with an extra torch, some batteries Abby had stored away, and a bit of snack food just in case. I was tempted to bring a recording device along, but somehow she convinced me that it wouldn't work. It's dangerous to bring it outside anyway, as the reaction to seeing any sort of electronic device has the potential to cause some hysteria. It was dark, as was expected, but as we entered, the smell of mildew and the damp air of the cave began to steadily grow. The daylight was already obscured partially by the trees, so venturing under packed dirt and rock definitely warranted a torch. The cave seemed to stretch on and on, farther than my light could reach. I switched the torch to a higher setting, but it made little difference. We walked for a bit. Essa wasn't keen on straying too far from the entrance, but Abby brought some chalk along to mark the walls, and that seemed to ease her mind a bit. After a while, my torch clicked off. It gave me a bit of a jump, but Abby, ever collected, simply reached into my pack and pulled out some new batteries. I had checked to make sure the torch had fresh ones in it before we'd left, but I suppose I had it on the high setting, and it seemed we'd been walking for quite a long time at this point. I brushed it off, and we continued. Eventually, the tunnel split into two directions. However, we decided fairly quickly to travel down the left path, as the right's roof seemed to slope down towards the floor, and we predicted we'd be in a tight squeeze in minutes. So we headed left, and sure enough, this tunnel had plenty of room to move, even come to walk next to each other if we hadn't been minding the damp walls. The tunnel grew steadily wider, and, eventually, we came to a larger opening with a couple of tunnels branching from it. That's when my light went out again. Abby insisted that we continue while I shuffled through my pack for the extra torch, thinking that the torch was the problem and not the batteries. Essa was keen on leaving, though, and when the other torch blinked out just as quickly after I turned it on, I had to agree. I had thought we'd been in there for hours, exploring dark passageways and finding more and more tunnels to travel down into. But when we returned, no fruits to bear for our labour, it was still mid-afternoon, the sun flitting through the leaves, a welcoming sight after seemingly so long in wet darkness. I want to go down again, but each time I think about it, I now get a sense of dread. I'm not sure why, and I'm not going to ignore it, but still, I'm going to plan better this time, and maybe Abby will have some insight on how to light our way, as torches don't seem to be our best option. This brings me to my final notes, which happen to correlate with the book much more than I'd hoped. It's quite childish, actually, but as I said, the book has been on my mind, and what with traversing the caverns, I suppose it's all I can think about right now. I'm usually not one to mix fantasy with reality, but, well, recently reality seems to be doing that all on its own. In the fantastical adventures, Timothy travels into a cave on the island of the Free when they finally reach it. While inside, he stumbles across a large cavern filled with light from glowing crystals. In the center, as is common of such genres of stories, there is a column of light shining down onto a pedestal. On it sits a book. The cover is not legible, but when he picks it up and opens it, it contains information on how to free the island if faced with the unjust rule of an outsider. While it's wildly specific, it was well brought up in the story. The book he found says that in order to return the island to freedom, a ritual must be performed that will ensure all will forget about what happened and start over, with no memories of rule in their minds. The offending outsider must also be removed permanently, however the person enacting the ritual should prefer. After the ritual is performed, Timothy is the only one that remembers anything that happened. The island returns to peace, though the people do not remember anything about their previous situation. The island becomes isolated again, and Timothy takes Meridian's crew, as well as the crew of another ship that had lost their captain, and sails off. It's quite bittersweet, but that's not what's on my mind. The inhabitants of the island forgetting everything that had happened. The way the inhabitants were described in the book is eerily similar to what I've observed during my time in Moorgrove. Blank stares when certain phrases are mentioned, the blatant lack of knowledge about history before a certain point. It seems that this town has forgotten something important. And maybe that's just my mind playing tricks on me, but if there's something, anything, to this theory, I have to find out what everyone has forgotten. End recording. The Domestic Life of Anthony Todd is a podcast written and recorded by J.R. Steele and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License. The audio is edited using Audacity, the free editing program. Thanks for joining me.